All right. Welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I am A's Philosophy. And tonight we're going to be having just basically a general discussion. I'm not sure if it will develop into an open discussion, but depending on if we do get some participation, that could very well become a possibility. But I did want to use this stream to basically air some thoughts that I've been having. Which I guess is what I usually do. And as usual, the topic is Christianity, the existence of God, and basically trying to resolve this ongoing discussion, which I guess has been taking place for thousands of years. One announcement that I have, and I guess I will screen share here for a second. Hold on, let me get that up real fast. Probably won't even be able to see it, but try to make it work anyways. If you go to the posts, so this is my channel, my YouTube channel. So you have the home tab, you have my videos, which there are not that many at this point, at least on the under that exact tab. You have the live, which is more recently mostly discussions. A lot of it's still the educational material, which is most of what I was doing in the beginning of this channel. But you do also have the playlist. I just want to kind of cover some stuff here. The ID updates. I'm going to get back into that. I think that's important. The evolution discussion, things like that. I haven't done one in a while, but probably will at some point. The educational presentations. Maybe I should zoom in a little bit. All my conversations with Matt Slick, which I think for people who are interested in learning more about Christian theology, especially as it relates to Matt Slick and his particular variety, which is Reformed Calvinistic theology. I've had a number of conversations with Matt Slick over the years, and I disagree with him very strongly about what is Christianity. But I learned a lot from him because I was having discussion with him at a time when I was really quickly, basically forming my views. And my discussion with him really helped me focus in on what, because I knew what he was saying was a problem. But he did a really good job of being articulate and explaining to me the version of Christianity that I think is problematic, which allowed me to then basically investigate what the solution to the problem is. So I think my conversations, boo, Calvinism is right. It's a very, very horrible ideology, and in many ways, it's dangerous. But a lot of what constitutes modern Christianity is dangerous. Now, the more that I think about it. But anyways, anyone who has a lot of free time on their hands can go watch those videos. I have some chess videos, which were just kind of things I randomly did. We got Objective Ethics in the chat. Good to see you. I was going to announce that. That was the announcement I was going to make, but we'll get to that. I reviewed some of the videos that I did with Matt Slick and some of my discussions in open rooms. There's a playlist there. So those are my playlists. A lot of these videos that are in the playlist are not going to be found on the home video or live tab. So you do have to kind of dig in there, and like the conversation with Matt Slick used to just fill the videos tab until I was like, you know what, I'm going to take them off the videos tab and just put them in a playlist. And if people want to go watch them, they can do that. But the reason I wanted to go into this is because on my posts, which used to be like the community tab or whatever you want to call it, I just wanted to put out an announcement, which is that Objective Ethics is actually in the chat. So he's involved in this announcement. On this upcoming Sunday, January 18th at 4 p.m. Eastern, he has invited me to partake in a conversation on his channel, and I'm looking forward to it. But in this, let me just read the announcement just so that I said notice, maybe announcement. It's the same thing, but notice is kind of like be aware. Like announcement probably would. Anyways, please join me on the Objective Ethics, and that's a hyperlink. You can click on it, go to his channel, subscribe to him. Please join me on the Objective Ethics YouTube channel for a conversation that will take place on Sunday, January 18th, 2026 at 4 p.m. Eastern. Based on the exchange that I've had with Daniel, the owner of that channel, the discussion will mostly focus on the corrupting influence that Paul of Tarsus has had on the Christian religion. But we may also delve into the validity of Christianity as a whole, or we may also discuss other topics. I don't know. I think part of it will be so maybe towards the end, once Daniel and I have had our discussion. Maybe other people who are involved with his channel will be able to join a panel, from what I understand, and they can ask. Basically, I'm willing to answer any question. I mean, as someone who is attempting to establish truth, all questions should be answerable. So if there's a question, and his channel is mostly going to be skeptics of Christianity. They're not going to be people who are interested in Christian theology. They're going to be interested in people who are. They're going to be people who are interested in more like, what is the validity of the basis of Christianity? And those are things that Christians have to answer. If we're going to be honest about whether our worldview is ultimately true. And in my opinion, if something isn't true, it isn't good. So if Christianity is false, then it must be discarded. So those, but again, I think that as far as the discussion itself, a lot of it will probably focus on Paul and his influence on Christianity. And just to finish it, I said I believe that will be an interesting conversation, and I encourage anyone who sees this message to be there on the live if possible, or if not, if you can't watch it live, watch the replay on his channel. It will never not blow my mind that Christians don't see through Paul's power grift. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Andy. The more I think about it, the more I listen to popularizers of Christianity, whether they be your typical internet evangelist or the mega church, because I actually do in my free time. I'm kind of weird. Like, I will seek out popular Christian evangelical, like whatever you want to call it, forums, platforms, and the people on them, and listen to what they're saying. And what they're saying gives me a broad representation of, basically, because they're popular, and there are many of them, it's a good sample of what Christians at large are going to believe, because these people wouldn't be popular if they didn't have, I mean, you could say that their audiences are kind of basically, with Twitter, you can make it look like you have a larger audience than you actually do. But these people, they do have followings. And the more I listen to them, the more I realize that modern Christianity is just not Christianity. It's Paulinism. They focus very heavily on the Pauline epistles, and they base their theology and teaching of Christianity mostly on what Paul teaches. And if they ever go to Jesus, it's like basically used to confirm Paul. Like, Paul said this. Oh, and even Jesus said the same exact. It should be the other way around, theoretically. Like, Jesus is the founder of the religion, so he should base everything on what he said. And if Paul said anything, it should be just that, oh, look, Paul confirmed it in one of his epistles. Not that he actually has any authority in religion, but it's just interesting to note that he did that. But modern Christianity is actually the other way around. Everything's based on what Paul wrote, and if they ever talk about Jesus, it's just to say, like, it's usually in the Gospel of John, just the verses that say all you have to do is believe something and you're saved. Paul said you had to believe, and look, Jesus said anyone who believes will be saved. That's why God sent his son. So it's like that. They never focus on all the passages where Jesus teaches that you have to. Curious to what your thoughts are on John's Gospel. Yeah, I mean, it's problematic. There's a lot of questions about it. Scholars have been basically noting the irregularities in John for centuries now, and the churches totally ignore all that. They don't want to acknowledge that the Gospel of John is very different from the Synoptics. They'll acknowledge it, but they won't talk about how it's an issue and how it's not just different, but that it contains a lot of information that seems to. There are some. I'm not going to be able to name scholars, but there are scholars I've listened to, and maybe I could go, who think that the author of the Gospel of John probably it's obvious that John is aware of the Synoptic Gospels, because the similarities are just too many that it's impossible that he didn't basically have knowledge of them. But it appears as though the Gospel of John is an effort to correct aspects of the Synoptic Gospels in some aspects. So you will find variations in the Gospel of John that if you go to the parallel passage in the Synoptics, to the extent that they exist, you will see that the theology of John is basically attempting to rewrite what is in the Synoptics. So this is, in my opinion, a possible theory. Again, it's hard to prove anything. But in my opinion, I've said this many times, I do not derive any of my doctrine from the Gospel of John. Now, here's the thing. What's interesting about the Gospel of John is that I do think parts of it probably are valid. But because of the abundance of questions about the Gospel of John, it's very hard to know which parts of those for me, I think I figured out which parts I think are more reliable, but attempting to restructure the institution of Christianity with my understanding is nigh on impossible. So yeah, I to me, I would like to see, now again, the Synoptics, of course, the scholars have their issues with those as well, but I think they're different issues. But to me, I think that Christianity, and we do see evidence of what I'm about to say, in early Christianity, the Synoptics were the basis of the religion, Synoptic Gospels. And they weren't even called the Synoptic Gospels at that point, in the very early phases. We see them just being quoted without direct reference. The first person to basically say that there are 4 Gospels and name them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is Irenaeus, around the year 200 AD. When you see the Synoptics being quoted before that, they are not being quoted like, this is from the Gospel of Matthew, or this is from the Gospel of Luke, this is from the no, you don't see that. What you just see is the quotations without any reference to a name of a person who wrote the Gospel. So what this tells me is that very early on, you also see that in the Didache. So this to me, basically, in my opinion, means that the information was there, that it was one of the earliest sources of what constitutes Christianity, and they were quoting it. But I guess it's so. To me, that signifies that the information in the Synoptics even probably is the most reliable, if I could throw it that way. And it seems to me that the Gospel of John came a little bit later, and whoever the authors, whatever they are, whoever they were, it probably happened over a period of time. We're already aware of the Gospel, the Synoptic Gospels, and used the Gospel of John to basically amend some things that they thought were problematic. But I agree, weird long form phrase that doesn't match the words of his alleged disciple. Dionysian themes being engaged, higher Christology. Yeah, the differences are stark, and you don't hear any of this in the churches, which is why and again, I think this is noteworthy. This is what got me on this, and why I think this is a good question, Andy, and I'm kind of going off with it, or running with it, is because something I notice is that in these popular evangelical Christians, pastors, influencers, whatever you want to call them, like I said, 9 times out of 10, when they're teaching their congregations, they are basically using the Pauline epistles. So Christianity today is basically Paulinism. But when they do quote Jesus, 9 times out of 10, it's the Gospel of John. So basically, modern Christianity, as it's being taught in the churches, is a vast majority is mostly Paul and a smattering of the Gospel of John. And rarely ever do you hear them go into depth about the content of the Synoptic Gospels, because if they did, it would blow up their whole industry, I think, because they would be constantly confronted with Jesus saying things that conflict with their gospel of grace theology. Hey, A. Probably the biggest inconsistency for me is the I am statement throughout John, but Jesus certainly charges his disciples and others to not go out and pronounce he's the Son of God in the Synoptics. Well, the I am statements, I'm trying to remember. I think you were the maybe a oneness proponent. I may be wrong about that. Like, scholars, a lot of evangelicals are saying that Jesus said "I am" to proclaim his own deity, and there's really I don't know where they're getting. Oh, no. Okay, no, man. Okay, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have characterized you without knowing exactly the case. But in any case, when it comes to the I am statements, a lot of them are, when the scholars point them, say, look, Jesus is claiming to be God. If you go to them, he's saying things like, "I am the good shepherd." And they'll say, "You see, ego e me." Exodus 3:14, God's name is I am. Jesus says the words "I am" in a sentence, therefore he's claiming to be God. And it's like, okay, the phrase "I am" is going to be a very common phrase. The inconsistency, when I'm just kind of bouncing off of your comment here, the "I am" statements, a lot of people want to say the "I am" statements of Jesus are him claiming to be deity. And if you go and read them, that's just not even close to the case. He's just saying sentences with the words "I am" in them in Greek. And again, Jesus didn't speak Greek, which is another whole issue, but let's just ignore that for now. So it's, the Greek, all the Gospels are translations of whatever Jesus actually said. So people need to understand that as well. But let's just say everything's, reliably translated. You're going to be saying the phrase "I am" a lot, no matter which language you're using. If you're comparing yourself metaphorically to some other, aspect of this world to try and, create an idea, you're going to be saying "I am" this or that. Oh, what you're saying is that you agree with the Book of John over and against the Synoptics. Okay, there are a lot of problems with that, in my opinion. I just think that there are a lot of problems with that, and I can go into them. So I guess what you're trying to say is that you have in John, you have Jesus claiming to be "I am," which is a high Christology, compared to the Synoptics, which kind of present him as like a mere man, and he's not really clearly presented as God. Whereas in the Gospel of John, he is, and you think that signifies the Gospel of John is more likely to be correct. Is that your kind of your thesis? Do I understand correctly? Okay, yes. Okay. There are big problems with that. The Book of John is full of holes. Okay, so in one comment you're saying the Book of John is full of holes, and another one you're saying I agree with the Book of John's inconsistencies. Oh, you're saying I'm actually having a hard time understanding what you're saying. You're saying you agree that the Book of John has inconsistencies. Is that what you're trying to say? You're saying that you see that the Gospel of John is incongruous with the Synoptics. Okay. See, now I'm finally on the same page. Right. Yes, and that was the point I was originally getting. You're right. I think and the point I was about to make, I think it's very significant that these Paulinist preachers, because it's not Christianity, it's Paulinism with in the garb of Jesus Christ. When they do quote Jesus, it's very usually also from the Gospel of John. So the Paulinists love the Gospel of John, but they rarely ever touch the Synoptics. So that shows me that the Gospel of John is written in the same spirit more or less as the Pauline epistles. And I've been very clear that the Pauline epistles, I think, are just antichrist in nature. And I don't, they talk about the antichrist as being like a guy who's going to take over the world. No, like antichrist just means against Christ. So the Pauline epistles are written in the spirit of basically teaching the complete opposite religion that Jesus did. So that's anti-Christ, against Christ. And the fact that the anti-Christ Paulinist preachers of this country are using John to support their arguments, I'm not saying it proves anything. I'm just saying it's an interesting correlation. So to me, I think that Christianity should be based on the synoptics to the extent that we can establish any validity. And by the way, I did have some other thing. I just wanted to, before we move on. So there's this announcement. I'm going to be on Objective Ethics channel. I was going to review these videos by skeptics, atheists posing problems to Christianity, and I was going to review a small portion of a debate, Does God Exist? So those are just things that are on tap for tonight for those who are willing to stick around. But we'll save that for a little bit. I'm going to kind of ramble a little bit and answer questions. In John, in John the Baptist doesn't know he's Elijah. And there is no wilderness 40 days, and Judas didn't pay. I mean, the inconsistencies are countless, dirty varmint. There are so many places in John where there is an apparent parallel in sort of the overall narrative of what's going on, but the Gospel of John changes things slightly in one way or another and erases details or modifies details and it creates a different theology. And it creates a different narrative entirely, an understanding of who Jesus is. Hello, why do you think that the teaching of Christ is a religion? Religion is connected to the moon. In ancient times, religion dealt with feelings of the heart. There's no religion in space. Why do you think that the teaching of Christ is a religion? Religion is connected to the moon. In ancient times, religion dealt with feelings of the heart. There is no religion in space. I honestly have no idea where to go with that comment. I'm sorry, Slavic Brotherhood. I don't know if like English is a second language for you, or I'm really not trying to be rude or disrespectful. There's a lot going on here, and maybe ask just one question and try to make it really focus it and figure out sure, there were moon religions, and sure, some spiritual traditions are based on feelings, I guess. But Christianity is based on the premise that Jesus Christ was a real person who was a prophet of God, who had real disciples who went out and taught the world what he said. So, I mean, whether Jesus was right or wrong, the religion is based on his historicity and what he supposedly taught. So it's not based on feelings. It's based on, did Jesus teach and act things that are actually true? There is no religion in space. Okay, I don't really know what to do with that comment at all. Like, I agree. Okay, so I'll just agree with that one. There is nothing wrong with the Gospel of John. I mean, that's a position that you can hold. The problem is that if you go read, here's what I'm going to challenge you to do, George Alexander. Go read, I'm serious. Take the next week or 2 weeks, read the synoptics, and then read the Gospel of John. And where there are places in all the Gospels that are called parallel passages, where an event that happens in one of the Gospels will be replicated in other of the Gospels. Like something that happens in Mark will be clearly reproduced in Matthew and Luke. And in some cases, these things will happen in the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John is very unique. What I challenge you to do is read all the synoptics and try to match the parallel passages in the synoptics that also occur in the Gospel of John. Just go read them and try to look at the parallel and try to harmonize everything. That's a homework assignment for you. Tell me, it's going to be really hard because when you do that, you're going to realize that the Gospel of John actually does contain some very serious differences that are almost impossible to harmonize with the synoptics. Now, scholars have been discussing this for centuries, so or at least a couple centuries. And they've been debating where, like evangelicals have been debating what are the proper solutions, how do we harmonize this? And the skeptics have also obviously come along and said, well, this is just clear evidence that something's wrong here. Like it can't all be true. So if you really think that there's nothing wrong with the Gospel of John, like honestly challenge yourself. Try to harmonize everything in the Synoptics and Gospel of John. In the Synoptics, Jesus meets Peter and Andrew at the Sea of Galilee, but in John, he meets them at the Jordan River. They are disciples of John. Yeah, that's a huge one. That's a huge one. Let's just go look at that one right now. Let's see if we can find it. All right, this is gonna I wasn't expecting to do this, but oh, let me share my screen. Sorry, I was doing this all with it. I forgot I didn't. I mean, this whole passage here is. All right, so here it is. This is Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 16. As he was going along by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net in the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Immediately they left the nets and followed him. Going on a little farther, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were also in the boat mending nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and went to follow him. They went into Capernaum, okay, in the Sabbath. Okay, so here we clearly see that Jesus finds Simon and Andrew going along by the Sea of Galilee. This is the Gospel of Mark. Okay, so let's go to the Gospel of John. Gospel of John. So here's Jesus right here. They're in the it doesn't say where they are. John said, "I baptize." Okay, say John. Confess. All right, sorry, folks. We're getting a little bit. I'm just trying to. I'm trying to find out where it actually says where Jesus saw them. Okay, so it says these things took place in Bethany. So Jesus meets John the Baptist at Bethany beyond the Jordan where John was baptizing. The next day he saw Jesus coming to him and said, behold, the Lamb of God. All right, this doesn't help us. The next day, John was standing with two of his disciples. So this is, okay, so we saw in the Gospel of Mark, clearly Jesus met Simon and Andrew at the Sea of Galilee, which is not in Bethany beyond the Jordan, okay, not even close. So here we see Jesus in John chapter 1, we have verse 35. Again, the next day, John was standing with two of his disciples. And he looked at Jesus and said, behold, the Lamb of God. These two disciples heard him speak and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, what do you seek? They said to him, Rabbi, which translated means teacher, where are you staying? He said to them, come and you will see. So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He found first his own brother Simon, said to him, we have found the Messiah, which means Christ. He brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. All right. So, yeah, Dirty Varmint's right. The two narratives are very difficult to reconcile because, all right, let's open them up both at the same time. Let's read them both. In Mark chapter 1, Mark chapter 1, verse 16, he says, as he was going by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, cast in a sea, for they were fishermen. So here in the Gospel of Mark, we have Jesus at the Sea of Galilee, finding Simon and Andrew there, and they're fishermen. But if you go to John, Andrew and Simon are disciples of John. They're not fishermen. And they're not at the Sea of Galilee. They're at beyond the Jordan. So if you look at where the Sea of Galilee is and where Bethany beyond the Jordan is, it's not the same place. They're very, very, very far away. They're like, actually, I think we looked this up before. I think it's not like 100 miles, but it's like 50 miles. It's a long distance. You can't see a person from one place to the other. Like, you have to actually go there. It's like a day. It's like several days travel in that time frame. So that's one thing that's just Jesus met Peter 4 days after he's at the Jordan. In John, he met Peter the next day. Yeah. The synoptic doesn't matter. The doctrine doesn't matter. Well, the problem is you have with that is we want what we believe to be ultimately true, right? So if John, who is, according to scholars, the later of the one of the latest gospels, is coming along and changing details about the synoptics that are in the synoptics and changing them, you do have to ask the question, why would he do this? Because it can't be true. So it calls into question a lot of what the other stuff that John wrote. You know what I'm saying? Just raises that question. And why in the synoptics, which I personally believe are where I rely on or think are more reliable, you have Simon and Andrew being just fishermen who Jesus meets and calls to be his disciples, and they choose to do so. For some reason in the Gospel of John, he wants to make Simon and Andrew disciples of John the Baptist. So why would he do that? Read my comments about synoptics. I want your thoughts on how that lines up with the Eusebius Peter Mark theory. Okay, let me go back and find that. Thought there are big problems between the synoptics as well. To be fair, why would Matthew copy from Mark's paraphrase retelling of Peter's story? And why did Mark barely mention Peter's perspective? I thought there are big problems between the synoptics as well. To be fair, why would Matthew copy from Mark's paraphrase retelling of Peter's story? And why did Mark barely mention Peter's perspective? Do you know what verses exactly? I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. That's probably, I mean, I'm sure it might be difficult to do that in this exact moment, but are you talking about where, like, so one of the questions about the writing of the Gospels is, what is the order in which they were written, and who used who to basically form the source material? And secular scholars and even evangelical scholars are of the opinion that Mark was the first gospel that was written. This is there are so many views. But the prevailing opinion is that Mark came first, and then Matthew, then Luke, and then John. So this has led many people to suggest that Matthew copied Mark. And that leads to the question, why would Matthew copy Mark if Matthew is an eyewitness? And I think there's a good answer to that question. I don't think it's difficult at all. To me, this isn't a problem. I think that what probably happened, again, I can't prove any of this. This is just something that makes sense to me, is that Mark wrote his gospel probably at least several years before the other ones did. And I think, and again, this is just what makes sense to me. It may not suit other people. It may not be a theory that other Christians would accept. But, to me, I think what probably happened is that Matthew became aware of what Mark had written because it had already become popular as a kind of written narrative of what Jesus taught. So I think what Matthew probably did is he didn't copy Mark for information. What he probably did was he probably used Mark's gospel as a template for his own gospel. So he used the gospel of Mark as a template, and then he amended it with his own knowledge of what Jesus taught. So that could be why there are these differences between, that to me, that explains a lot. That explains a lot. It would explain a lot. Now, again, is that theory true? I have no way of proving that. But it would be a plausible, valid explanation for kind of how things look in these kinds of questions of why did Matthew, basically the overall question is the overall idea is why did Matthew copy Mark if Matthew already knew everything in the beginning? And I think my theory makes a lot of sense. Mark wrote his gospel. Matthew, because Mark's gospel eventually became very popular in Christian circles, Matthew eventually became aware of it. And then he used that gospel as template to write his own gospel because he wanted to basically base his ideas on something that was already popular and use those ideas, which he agreed with, but also put his own ideas into it as well. And eventually that specific history was lost. So that now scholars just look at it and say, well, Matthew just copied Mark and added his own words. It's like, well, there is a reasonable explanation for how this could have happened. Matthew copied like 90% of Mark and almost exactly. So whatever Mark wrote, Matthew probably agreed with most of it, thought it was sufficient, and added his own ideas. He didn't need to change it, or it was already, like I said, a template to which he added whatever information he added. And you can go and look at the differences between the Mark and Matthew and see that Matthew just used Mark as a template, added his own thoughts. The only way I can reconcile would be reject Eusebius's narrative about Mark getting his info from Peter, you don't have to reject the idea that, and again, that Eusebius got that from Papias. So Papias was much earlier than Eusebius. So Mark got his information supposedly from Peter. And then Mark wrote his gospel, which was fine as it was. Eventually, Matthew came upon it and used it as a template for his own gospel. I don't see a problem with that narrative. Now, again, there's no way to prove that's what actually happened. But it would be a possible answer to all of the questions about Mark and Matthew that scholars and skeptics have, that basically doesn't rely on Matthew first not existing or not being an author, or second having to copy Mark because he doesn't know what's going on. Like, I think what he probably did was he probably just looked at Mark and was like, yeah, a lot of this, people like this. I'm just going to add some of the stuff that I know about what Jesus said in as well. And that way people will have the familiarity of what they already like in the Gospel of Mark, plus my own insights about what Jesus taught, which add a lot to the knowledge base. Right, but then why no emphasis on Peter's perspective from Mark? And why did Mark refer to the guy who cut the guy's ear off as one of them there as opposed to Peter? Let's go look at that. How did Mark? That's interesting. Again, I'm just going to go look at it just to make sure I know exactly what it says. Here, Mark 14. Okay. Excuse me, I'm reading this just to make sure I know. They laid hands on him and seized him, but one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. So that we learn in another synoptic is Peter. So if Mark knows it's Peter, why doesn't he just call it? Why doesn't he just say Peter cut off his ear? There are a number of reasons why he might have done that. Again, I'm obviously not going to say anything with any level of certainty, but a possible theory, again, this is a theory, is that maybe he thought, Peter was someone he probably highly respected, being, he followed Peter. He was supposedly, according to tradition, a follower of Peter. Maybe he didn't want people knowing that Peter did that. He was attempting to hide that fact, but Matthew, or whoever recounted the other version, knew it and was just like, you know what, people can know it's Peter, it's fine. Something like that. I mean, that, again, that's just a theory. It's not, I'm not saying I know for a fact that that's what happened, but it doesn't mean that, Mark doesn't, to me, this isn't problematic. Yeah, it's probable that, I mean, again, we're just talking about possibilities here. But it's possible that Mark knew it was Peter, didn't want to say that. And Matthew sees that what Mark wrote, does know the truth, and is willing to say that, yeah, it was actually Peter who did that. There's no reason to hide that information. If he heard this from Peter, he would have said, not necessarily. If he heard it from Peter and he had, if let's say you hear something that you think is embarrassing for someone that you respect or have feelings towards, perhaps, whether they be not necessarily romantic feelings, but just a friend. But you also want to relate a story to someone else, and you don't want that particular piece of information to be known. I can see that being the case here. Like, you're telling the story, you know who it is, but you just leave out the identity because maybe you don't want it, for whatever reason, you just don't want it to be known. Whenever someone says you can't cherry pick, I always quote Deuteronomy 30:19. I have set before you life and death, blessed and cursing, therefore cherry pick life. The only thing is, Dirty Varmint, you got to be careful that you're not just picking things because you like them. The ultimate goal is to find out what's true. We don't want to just erase the portions of the Bible we don't like because our theology differs from them, or because for whatever reason we just don't like them. I think that if we're cherry picking things, it's not because it's based on our preferences, it's based on what we can discern is actually true. So if we can determine that one or the other thing is true or false, then obviously we should choose what's true because it's true, not because we like it or because we think it's a better teaching or whatever. Possibly, but he had no problem showing Peter deceiving Jesus, or Jesus 3 times, or probably denying Jesus 3 times. Again, I mean, I could come up with a reason for why he might have chosen to hide one thing and not said another. I can't. I'll agree with you, Andy. These are interesting questions. Can I think of a reason that satisfies me? Yes, I can. Would it satisfy you? Maybe not. But I can think of a reason. It may just be that Mark was, just being inconsistent, because people do that. Like, maybe it was because Mark knew that people already, maybe this was like, let me put this one out there. Let me put this theory out there. again, I'm just speculating, but this is a possibility. Maybe so many people already knew that story about Peter that there was no reason to hide it anymore. They are so many, because the Gospels were probably being transmitted orally in various for decades before anyone ever wrote them down. It could be that by the time that Mark wrote his Gospel down, everyone knew the story about Peter denying Jesus 3 times, but maybe not as many people knew the story about Peter cutting off the servant's ear in the garden. Something like that might be an explanation. John is the one who said Peter cut off the ear, so I think John is wrong. It wasn't Peter. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I wasn't sure which gospel it was that said Peter cut off the ear. To me, it's kind of a minor detail, whichever gospel said it has. To me, there are explanations for it that don't bother me. So then John has Jesus putting the ear back on. Yeah, that is an added detail. For me, the lack of Mark telling the story from Peter's perspective or things involving Peter is the most suspicious. I'm not gonna lie, that's a valid point. It's a valid question. It doesn't ever say. Well, here's the thing. Just because it doesn't say that the information is derived from Peter or it doesn't mention Peter doesn't necessarily mean that Mark probably wanted to use a certain literary form. He probably didn't want to write it as him, following Peter around and just, this is what Peter said to this guy at this date. He wanted to probably write it in a literary form that was maybe a little more basically create a narrative about Jesus' life that didn't require talking about Peter or the source of the information. Just putting it just basically putting out the information out there. I mean, yeah, to me that's very plausible. Like I'm sure. I mean, sure if I thought long enough, I could probably find examples of people we know were influenced by other people, but who never mentioned them in their writings. I mean, I'm sure history is replete with basically philosophical disciples of one teacher or another writing something, and then scholars coming along later and saying, "Well, we know he was influenced by so and so." Like, probably a good example would be Plato and Socrates. Now, that's not the best example, just because Plato did very clearly say that he was, a student of Socrates and heard him speak and talked about the things Socrates said. But the idea is, a lot of Plato's writings, he doesn't necessarily say that he's quoting or like directly referencing something taught by Socrates, but you can probably like infer that his what he believes is heavily influenced by what Socrates said. So it could be something like that, but I'm sure there are many other examples in history where scholars have been able to say, like even if you look at the book of like what they're saying about the book of Acts now, how the book of Acts was clearly influenced by Josephus's writings. Well, the book of Acts doesn't say whoever wrote it doesn't say he was, but you can tell because of the similarities. So scholars have been able to determine this not because of what's actually said explicitly in the book of Acts, but based on the internal evidence. And you wouldn't really know about Josephus's writings in the book of Acts unless you had read them and were familiar with the similarities. But we can pretty decisively say, I think, or at least some people claim, that the author of the book of Acts was influenced by Josephus and maybe a number of other writers. But you never hear that in the writing itself. But we can probably confidently say that he was. So there's that. Like there's these things happen. Um, anyways, uh, not a lot. The thing is, not a lot of Christians are going to accept what my answers to things. And I'm trying to figure out, basically, I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to go about reforming Christianity. Not that I'm going to be able to succeed in that my own little self, but it's just something, if I was able to do it, like, because I just listen to what's being taught in the churches, and I'm not going to lie, like, I can sympathize with atheists a lot when I hear what's being taught at a popular level in Christianity, and kind of the mindlessness of it, the naivety of it, the senselessness of it, how a lot of it doesn't make sense. But I think it can all be traced back to the fact that real Christianity is just not being taught. Everything's based on the teachings of Paul. I think if people actually like just if Christianity today was actually what I thought real Christianity was, I think it would make a lot more sense to people. There would be far more people who could easily pierce its holes and show the problems in it. One really weird similarity between Acts and Josephus is the Egyptian character. According to Josephus, he claimed he would destroy the temple and rebuild in 3 days. That's interesting. That's what I haven't heard before. I'm not saying it's not true. Oh gosh. Dirty Varmint, you're hoping for Jill to come in? Are you that entertained by train wreck conversations? Is that really what we want tonight? And Acts shows Paul being mistaken for the Egyptian. Huh. One really weird similarity between Acts and Josephus is the Egyptian character. According to Josephus, he claimed he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. And Acts shows Paul being mistaken for the Egyptian. Huh. I'm not sure what to make of that. The Egyptian apparently led a group of 4,000 on the Mount of Olives. So what I'm detecting here is that is a mythicist insinuation that stories in Josephus became the basis for Jesus Christ. I'm not sure the timelines lead. I'm not sure the timelines make sense because, from what I understand, Josephus was very, very famous and well known by the late first century, and that's when he wrote, according to my understanding, his major works. I'm just going to look this up right now. When did Josephus write Antiquities, which I think is one of his major, or maybe it was Antiquities, which is one of Josephus's most famous works, was written in 93 AD. For that. So when did he write War of the Jews or whatever it was called? The Jewish War. That's right. The Jewish War. Excuse me. Okay, he wrote the Jewish War 75 AD, which is significantly sooner than that. Let me reset here. No, I shouldn't have done that. Hold on, let me go back. I don't really need this right now. Josephus wrote, so I don't, whether this Egyptian character is in the Jewish War or Antiquities probably would make a difference because they were written 2 decades apart. Jewish War was written first, so let's say it's in Jewish War. I don't know that for a fact. Let's just say, so that would have to be written in 75 AD. So that means that if Josephus's stories were the basis of Jesus Christ, they would have their creation in these narratives. of Josephus. The earliest Jesus story could be is 75 AD, but we have non-Christian sources saying that the Christian groups existed before that time frame. So I don't think it works out, Andy. I don't think that Josephus' stories, just based on chronology, can possibly serve as the basis for the Jesus narrative, a Jesus mythological narrative. I just don't. That was a train wreck. Jill cannot read apparently, but he insists he can educate. Yeah, I talked to Jill not because I think I'll change his mind, but because I just want people to see, like, these people have no good arguments when you actually know how to refute them. It's pretty easy to see that they're just believing whatever they want, making it up, and it's just wrong. But I leave that up to the audience to figure out based on the conversation. Origin stories were circulating about the Egyptian, not necessarily from Josephus, possibly orally. Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I think personally the historicity of Jesus is an interesting conversation. I've looked into it. I think there's very good information. I think there's very good reason to believe that Jesus existed, was a real person, had real disciples. I think that a lot of the mythicist narratives fall apart at one level or another. So there are different mythicists, basically presentations. So you have Joseph Atwill, the Caesar's Messiah. You know, the Romans came up with Jesus to subdue the Jews, which they then went on to conquer militarily, which kind of, you know, basically they went through this whole elaborate process of creating a Jesus character to subdue the Jews, make them a more amenable. Like, Jesus was supposed to be like someone who would make them favor the Roman Empire. So they create all these texts, pass them around, try to get this giant group of people to become Christians. And then in 74 AD, they just wipe them out. It just doesn't make sense. There's Joseph Atwill. His theory falls apart. I've looked at a lot of mythicist ideas, like people are saying that Paul made up Jesus nowadays, which is, or the Paulinists or whatever, which is crazy. Things like this. He came from Josephus. He came from the Dionysian cults, the Egyptian Osiris or whatever it was. I've looked into all of them. None of them. I'm not going to go into it here. None of them holds water at the end of the day for me. I think that it's not likely that a person and a group of people would be created whole cloth, no actual basis in history. So you have to realize, for the mythicists to be right, Jesus didn't exist, and neither did any of his disciples. But the Gospels would be written within a couple decades of this non-existent person who would have followers who were still alive. And you would think at some point would be like, hey, where are these guys? No one's ever seen Peter, Andrew, John, and Bartholomew and all these people. Like, where are these guys? And there's all these churches, and everyone's gonna be looking around like, wait, yeah, we've never seen them either. What's going? But they're all like, being killed by the Romans, and continue to believe this idea. No one's ever seen anyone associated who actually founded the movement. It's very, very far-fetched. Mythicism all mythicism is, to me, highly unlikely, just based on what I know about human nature. And if some people will believe something based on just pure hearsay, but I don't think you can get a movement that would explode like Christianity did, that basically exploded within a couple decades of its founding, based on complete whole cloth fabrication, which is what the mythicists have to rely on. They have to fall back to Jesus never existed and his apostles never existed. I mean, you could probably get away saying that the apostles existed and made Jesus up, but I feel like eventually somebody would expose them. Do we see anyone in antiquity saying like, hey, these people? I don't think we see anyone saying, people, there was never any Jesus. I mean, the information is scant, I'll give you that, but I don't think we have anyone making the case that Jesus just never existed. And we know this because X, Y, and Z. I think if the mythicists had a case, you would have more people, maybe, possibly, it's more likely that you would have people saying, yeah, actually, we found out that the whole Jesus thing was made up. There was no Jesus. There were no apostles. There was no ministry, nothing. Now, I can see a skeptic saying, well, they made up the stuff about the miracles and the resurrection and all that. So if they can get away with that, then they can get away with making up Jesus entirely. I mean, there is that. I was asking AI about Melchizedek, and it said bread and wine was a way to formally conclude a covenant. All right. Probably in reference to something that I said. Yes, but the stories by the Egyptians obviously predate Josephus by some amount of time. We just don't know how long. There are probably stories being told, or, oh, well, I haven't seen that information. It might be true. I just haven't seen that information. I also don't think Jesus was a fictional character. I think that his story is a conglomerate of a few different people from that time who rebelled against Rome. Well, that would be Jesus himself would be fictional because he never existed as an individual person. So he would be a fictional. Yeah, that to me necessarily would logically mean Jesus is fictional because he never existed. The other people did, and they all just got mishmashed into one guy named Jesus. Again, the problem I have with this, the main problem I have with any mythicist viewpoint is that it's not necessarily that Jesus didn't exist, but if Jesus never existed, then really none of it ever existed. You have no disciples, nobody actually following Jesus, never seeing him. But you have the Gospels basically being written within the timeline, within the lifetime of the people who would supposedly. I just think if people really wanted to falsify Christianity, which I'm sure a lot of people did back then, especially the Jews, the first thing they would write about and point out is that, hey, none of these guys actually exist. Have any of you ever seen Jesus' disciples? Have any of you ever seen Jesus? Did anyone ever actually? I mean, the Jesus movement, the Christian movement, was clearly flourishing, according to even secular sources, by a couple decades after the events narrated in the Gospels. So that would be a good time for, the Jews. A lot of other people, the Romans, actually did not like Christianity, to go around and be like, hey, none of this actually happened, people. Where are these disciples that Jesus supposedly had? All these things are fake. It's all just a story that's made up. We don't see things like that. We see people actually engaging with the arguments that are being made by the early Christians. Correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, but it's undeniable that the Christian narrative, no, that's not true. The Roman Empire tried very hard to stamp out Christianity. It saw it as a problem. There are Roman emperors who talked about executing the Christians because they're becoming a problem. Nero executed Christians, talking about how they won't worship the emperor or pay him his due respect. And then you have, if the Gospels were written pro-Rome, you have Jesus saying things like, render unto God what is due unto God, and render unto Caesar what is due unto Caesar. You have Jesus saying that Caesar isn't God, but the whole idea is that people are supposed to worship Caesar. So no, that's just not true. The Roman Empire did not benefit from Christianity. They spent a long time trying to eradicate it. And it wasn't until centuries later that Constantine basically co-opted Christianity. George, I'm not saying I believe that, George. There are other people who I'm responding to the arguments that other people are making. In defense of the mythicists, though, virtually all accounts of the people that met Jesus are mythological in nature and directly parallel other mythologies from that time. I mean, that's your opinion. And again, that's not to dismiss you or be disrespectful, but you view them as being mythological in nature. Like if you read the Gospel of Luke, he's not presenting it. I mean, you could say it's mythological, but and you can think it's mythological. You might be right, but it's being presented as real history. If you're making up a lie, Obviously, you're going to want to make people think it is real, and then you're going to create the myth. But again, just think about the logistics of what's taking place in the timelines. Is what I would go back to, Andy. The Jesus movement was clearly blossoming even before the gospel accounts were written. Okay, and the early Christians had many enemies and people who didn't want Christianity to succeed. Take the Jews, for example, the previously existing religious system, the Pharisees, whatever you want to call it. Their power is being threatened by Christians. They exist in a time frame where if there were no actual apostles, no actual disciples, and again, many early Christian sources say that the Christian movement was based in Jerusalem. This would be a great time for the Pharisees and the other religious, cast of that time to go around and be like, where are these apostles everyone keeps talking about? Supposedly they're in Jerusalem. Where are they? No one can find them. Isn't that a huge problem for the mythicists, that if the people who are enemies of Christianity wanted to falsify Christianity because it's a myth, they could have easily done it by by going up to people and be like, hey, these apostles don't exist. They're nowhere to be found. I think once people, you're not going to get a movement like Christianity actually taking off the ground unless there is some real basis to it. Especially when you're saying in your founding documents that there are real people with real names, real identifiable individuals. At the same time that the documents are being written, you're giving people a way to falsify your religion or your new myth by doing that. Because they can easily take the document, say, hey, this thing says that there are apostles and they have names and there are 12 of them, and they should still mostly be around if they haven't been killed already. And if people are reading the documents and seeing the names Peter, John, Andrew, Bartholomew, Thaddeus, whatever, going Thomas, but they're not seeing these individuals, and no one's seeing anyone who's ever met Jesus or the people in these documents, how are you going to get people to believe it? And in some cases, apparently give their lives for it. I just don't think it makes sense. No, I'm saying they are potentially attributing stories from others to an actual Jesus that existed, glorifying him with the accomplishment of others. Okay. I mean, okay, that's possible. That's possible. But I would say that also is, I mean, there was clearly a mythologizing at some point, because that's my whole case about what Paul did. So at some point, things did go off the rail. But I think there's also enough basis for an actual real Christianity that we can identify what happened. The Brotherhood of the Essenes was a group of Jews who lived around Egypt. Most of the students were part of the spiritual school of people who preached the coming of Jesus. Yeah, I've heard about the Essenes. You could argue that the movement grew so clearly because it was a version of Judaism that frees you from laws and plate. Well, no. That was Pauline Christianity. What Jesus taught, as recorded in the Synoptics, is that you have to obey the laws. The Romans did not spend a long time trying to eradicate Christianity. There were numerous sources like Pliny who were instructed not to seek out early Christians. Okay, that's an entire discussion. Nero blamed the Christians for fires, which is why there was some early Christianity, but that was not widespread and it was shortly. I know that scholars claim that, but I think that there are enough stories of martyrdom and non-Christian sources talking about the execution of Christians that we can say that the governing forces of that time were hostile to Christianity. Okay. So it's not like it's the thesis that the Romans created Christianity and then immediately began attacking it, which is Joseph Atwill's idea, is just nonsense. Right, but Paul took over very early on, so Pauline Christianity would have likely been present when it quickly grew. Yeah, I think what, and then again, this is probably something I can discuss on Objective Ethics channel. Maybe I won't go into this too deeply, just because maybe that's something that could be discussed there or more deeply. I think that what Paul did was basically infiltrate the movement that was already very quickly growing. And he operated on his own, which is what he says in his epistles, essentially. He rarely interacted with the actual apostles. He kind of did his own thing and established his own churches. So my guess, again, we're getting into speculation again, and that's the best I can do. But it's trying to create plausible theories about what might have happened. That I think actually probably did happen. I think that Paul went ahead of the actual apostles, established his own church, so that by the time the real apostles got to where he had been, the people already thought that Christianity was what Paul was teaching. But the only reason Paul was able to do that in the first place is because Christianity already existed, and thus he was able to kind of present himself as a Christian. But for him to do that at all, he can't just make up Christianity. Christianity already has to be a thing. So what Paul did is he presented himself as a Christian to people who weren't aware of what real Christianity was. But they did know that Christianity was a thing out there that people were talking about. I think Paul's writing from the high priest. I think Paul's writ from the high priest who kidnapped Christians from Damascus, a Roman city, is what led to the destruction of the temple. Paul saw Caesar around 68 AD, right? Some of that's possible. I'm not sure if I agree with it necessarily, but I mean, I don't know, Andy. Excuse me, not Andy. Dirty. It's a theory I would have to. I've never really looked into it, thought about it, but I'm not saying it's impossible, but perhaps is all I can say. I agree, but I think he magnified that growth exponentially with his laid back version of it. Jesus wanted full fledged Judaism, which was difficult and traumatizing. You could be right. You might be right about that. You might be the reason Paul's Christianity might have taken off and overtaken real Christianity is probably because it was more appealing to the masses. You're absolutely right about that. So that is a theory I can actually agree with. The reason modern Christianity is basically Pauline Christianity is because Paul's Christianity was more appealing to a wider range of people, and people don't like real Christianity, so they ignore what Jesus actually taught. That is a theory that makes a lot of sense to me. That's the problem we're trying to deal with today. That's the problem I'm trying to deal with. I'm trying to tell people that the Christianity that has grown from that early cancerous source needs to be recognized as such, and we need to go back to the real Jesus, the real teachings of Christ, which is going to be a very hard thing to do as far as because I've been doing this for long enough to know that this is going to be a tough. Any success is going to be meager, at least at the outset, because I've been doing this for a couple years now on the internet, and the number of people who've kind of jumped on the bandwagon is minimal, to say the least, and a lot of resistance. So Christians are going to fight me tooth and nail. I didn't say the Romans invented Christianity, but to deny the utility provided by uniting the entire Roman under one religion, which taught subservience to Rome, is I don't think Christianity teaches subservience to Rome. I don't think it teaches that at all. I think the early Christians clearly resisted the Roman Empire and fought against them, and there's entire movements based on the resistance to Christianity and the people who were martyred while fighting the Romans. There's a movement, there's a name for people who apostatized because they were being persecuted by What are their names? Let me look this up. This would be interesting history. I think they were called the Donatists. Who are the Donatist Christians? Uh, no, that's not correct. I think it's close. Sorry, I'm trying to. I have to look at this another time. I don't want to waste too much time. Basically, there was a serious argument in the early Christianity about what to do with people who had pronounced a profession of faith to Christ at one point, but basically recanted because of the persecution of the Romans. But then when the Romans kind of laid off, they wanted to come back. So there was a massive question about what to do with this large group of people. So for that to be that significant of a question tells me that the Roman persecution was widespread, and it was something that the Romans tried to eliminate because it was not providing any sort of unity in their mind. You're doing the Lord's work, slowly bringing the truth back in light, piece by piece. Yeah, I'd like to think so. Of course, from a skeptic's perspective, all I'm doing is kind of bringing them back to another bunch of mumbo jumbo that has no basis in reality anyways. But to me, I think that if we're going to defend Christianity, let's defend real Christianity. This is the problem I have. Like when I hear Christians, all right, here's my problem, Andy. Here's my problem. When I look at debates between Christians and atheists, or Christians and skeptics, whatever you want to call them, anyone who's hostile to the Christian faith, they're not defending Christianity. They're defending a corrupted and perverted version of Christianity that has nothing to do with what Jesus actually taught. So I would like to see, can Christianity survive if we're actually defending what Christianity is really supposed to be? Right now, we're defending, not we, but the people I'm seeing, they're out there defending a version of Christianity that's just this. I agree with the atheists. This is a bunch of malarkey. And I think that these Christians have the right intention. They see truth in Christianity, but they've fallen into the institutions that have grown up as a result of the Catholicizing of Christianity. So what I would like to see is, instead of these apologists going out there and defending this mangled, distorted version of Christianity, let's actually figure out what real Christianity actually is, and then we can defend that from the attacks of the skeptics. Right now, we're defending a monstrosity, and I'm almost with the atheists. I'm like, yes, this is a dangerous idea. The Christianity that's taught in modern churches is destructive to society. It's psychologically destructive. It's ethically destructive, and it's, in my opinion, just false, which, if it's false, doesn't matter if it's good or, something that inspires people or not. It's false, it's false. What's, to me, the only thing that inspires is what's true. If someone could, disprove Christianity to me, I would have to abandon it, because the only thing that's actually good is what's true. I think Jesus wanted full-fledged Judaism, but without the false Judaism. Yeah, I can agree with that. And obviously the argument there, Dirty, as you're well aware, is that the sacrificial system was never an aspect of real Christianity, which Jesus himself taught, sort of. Dirty, I kind of lean that way too. That seems to be his primary focus when he altered redefined laws. Right. And he's on the same page. Jesus wanted Judaism, but he wanted, I think what's amazing is Jesus saw the issue. He wanted real Judaism. And part of what was fake came from not just the Pharisaic system, but the texts themselves. I think Jesus was aware of that. And I think it's very clear from what he taught that he actually taught that for people to believe. I think the early Hebrews adopted the Canaanite practice of animal sacrifice and put it in the Bible in order to make money. Well, we can argue about who put it in the Bible and why, but clearly, if animal sacrifice isn't true Judaism, then it for one reason or other, it was introduced as a corruption. So we didn't have to figure out who it was and why they did it. But that theory would be one possibility for sure. The only martyrdom stories I'm familiar with are much later developments. I would be curious to see your sources on that. Well, there are many of them. I mean, you could argue that some of them come from Christian sources, like had the martyrdom of Polycarp. Okay, scholars have torn that apart, but I don't think people are arguing that Polycarp never got martyred. I think they're just arguing that he didn't maybe he didn't write that letter. But I don't think there are scholars who doubt that the Romans were executing prominent Christians, and that for a long time, I wish I could find the name of that movement. I think it's the Donatists. Let me try and I'm just going to do this for you. Who were the Donatist heretics? Let me look at that. Let me see if that gives me. No, it's not the Donatists. It's somebody else. I'm going to have to do the research in it. I'm going to have to research this. There is a group of Christians. There was a name for them. They were a group of people who, during the Roman persecutions, fell away from the faith, said we're no longer Christians, we don't want to be executed. But then when the Romans left and went somewhere else, they came back to the churches and were saying, hey, we still want to be Christians. We lied because we didn't want them to kill us. And then the actual church had to decide what to do with these people who had basically went back on their profession of faith because they were afraid. I wish I could. If someone could find that for me, I would be really happy. I can't do it. I can't do it right now just because I don't want to just focus for the next 15 minutes on finding this information. But Mike is in the chat. I think the early Hebrews were Canaanites themselves. I think they were likely emerged around the Bronze Age collapse. Possible. It's cringeworthy to hear these debaters. Yeah, I mean, for what's the problem for me, Grant, is that I think their heart is in the right place. We're talking about these Christian apologists, but they think they have to defend this monstrosity that is currently called Christianity because, they think that's what Christianity really is. But they're defending all these indefensible ideas. They really are, because they're defending a system as opposed to a system that has arisen over time, as opposed to the original system as it was intended. But they're defending the system as it is because they feel like if that falls, then everything's going to fall. But my point is the current system deserves to fall because it's so bad. It's as bad as atheism. I mean, excuse me to the atheists in the chat, but I don't think modern Christianity deserves to survive. I don't care if it lives or dies because it's bad. But I really would like to see what Christ actually taught survive, because I think it's the actual solution to humanity's problem. So I think a big problem with modern Christian apologists is they're defending a system that's just indefensible. And if they actually listen to me or people like me, we would be able to defend something that is actually worth defending and defensible. That's why I believe most of the Muslims have better arguments. Yeah. Sometimes I listen to Muslims and I'm like, wow, I never thought I would agree with a Muslim and think they sound smarter than Christians. But here we go. They're because they don't have to defend the Trinity. Half of these, when I listen to these debates with atheists from the Christians, half the time, if not more, the Christian starts off, I am defending the true Trinitarian Godhead, the one God in three persons, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, the only God that has ever existed. And if you don't presuppose that God, you can't even know if 2 + 2 = 4. And it's like, oh my dear heavens, this did not start off well. This is not going to go well. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Mainstream Christians have an epistemology that is completely incoherent. Things like Trinity nonsense. Yeah, free grace. It's bad. I agree. I was wondering if you favor deontology or utilitarianism. Deontology is the rights of the many do not outweigh the rights of the individual. Yeah, I favor deontology because if you can make the argument that you can deny a single individual's inherent rights, and we have to define what are rights and where do they come from, then I think you can make the case that you can deny any number of individuals their right as a group. So you have to come at it from the perspective that every single individual on earth has to have his or her rights respected. And to me, the question becomes, what are rights, and what is the basis for saying that humans have rights? And I don't think atheists have very good answers to those questions, personally. It all comes down to, well, it feels right. Okay, does a trans person have a right to be considered their trans identity? They will argue that they do. I will argue that the only right they have is for people to accept absolute truth, which would necessitate that their identity be rejected. So, but you're hurting their feelings. It's about feelings. And so they define rights based on what feels good instead of what is an actual right. Chatting. No offense to any transgenders who might be listening. That was just an example. Freddie's in the chat. Good to see you. Happy birthday. Thank you. All right. So, of course, the early Hebrews were Canaanites. Objective ethics. Not exactly. Abraham was a Chaldean, and his people became Egyptian slaves, so not Canaanites. My guess is that objective ethics does not believe that aspect of the narrative. That's probably how he would respond. He would probably argue that Abraham was a Canaanite, but the story was changed to make him a Chaldean to cover up the fact that he was a Canaanite. I'm putting words in objective ethics' mouth, but I can absolutely see a skeptic, maybe not necessarily him, basically responding in that manner. And I'm not saying I disagree with you, Verdi. I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a skeptic. All right, let's listen to here. I did want to do this. Let's look at some videos of atheists criticizing Christianity, and let's see if I can answer the questions. Sharing screen. Hopefully this works.
We all pray for Bruce Wayne. He got so utterly.
So let's get real, folks.
All right. Questions for Christians from our Brooklyn Lou has been on my channel before. I'm not sure if he remembers, but I have had a number of conversations with Brooklyn Lou. So let's see here. This is questions for Christianity.
Folks, if God is undetectable, unfalsifiable, untestable, and unobservable in any way, why in the world do we run around saying he is real? What other things that are not able to be detected do we consider real? Could it be, my Christian friends, that God is a product of the human mind? So let's get real.
All right. All right. So let's listen to the beginning again. Just the question.
Folks. If God is undetectable, unfalsifiable, untestable, and unobservable in any way, why in the world do we run around saying he is real?
All right, so there's your question. If God can't be observed, detected, tested, so on and so forth, then why do we pretend he's real? So I actually responded to him in the comments. So let's read my responses. Come on, work. How do I expand this? Is there a way to... This is a tiny little box. I can't work with this. Let's see if we can... All right, we're just gonna do it this way. Tiny little box in the middle. Sorry about that. I don't know how to make it bigger. Maybe I can copy and paste all this. No, let's just read it. So many things wrong in this video. First, many people claim to have experienced seeing God, so you are ignoring their testimony. Oh, control scroll? Yeah, that... Doesn't make the box bigger, it just makes it zooms in on the screen. Oh, what did I get here? Hold on 1 second. Okay, never mind. Sorry, somebody texted me. All right, so many things wrong in this video. First, many people claim to have experienced seeing God, so you're ignoring their testimony. Secondly, a lot of things we know exist were undetectable, unobservable, untestable for most of history until we developed the tools to do so. Did those things not exist until we were able to develop methods to observe them? A worm can't observe the sun directly, but that wouldn't be a good argument. The sun is imaginary. Could it be you use such poor logic because you don't want God to exist? Seems plausible to me. Okay, that was... Sometimes when I do comments, I am a little bit ruder than I should be. That was probably unnecessary, but it wasn't too bad. So let's see how... And I hate to admit, you will see a little bit of that. I will get a little snarky at times, but hopefully it doesn't hurt his feelings too bad. The main point is what I already said. So he comes back at me. Brooklyn Lou wants to engage, which I appreciate. What exactly did I say that was untrue? Is God falsifiable? Is he testable? Is he detectable? Is he observable? Stories are not good evidence. Yes, maybe gods exist, but we have literally no good evidence other than the stories of people. So what are other things or persons do you think are real that are not detectable in any way? If we do develop a way to observe God, then maybe I will believe in him. I do not believe in such things until they are demonstrated to be true. So if you want to say you believe in a God, or that maybe we just can't observe him now, but maybe able to sometime in the future, I can totally understand this. But to say he is real, I am not buying it. All right, so my next response to that is, you are assuming that because you haven't observed God, that means it is impossible to observe God, or that no one has done so. But countless people throughout history from many different backgrounds have not only claimed to have a direct experience of a higher power, but also other things considered spiritual, such as visions of heaven and hell. Sure, you can argue a vast majority of them were either lying or crazy, and you'd probably be correct. But even if one of them is telling the truth, that is necessary. And given the mountain of eyewitness testimonies throughout history, I think that possibility is actually quite high. As for things that we can't observe but know exist, look into dark matter. We know it's there indirectly, but we have no idea what it is. We can't observe it, only its effects. I would say the situation is similar with God. Yeah, so to me, I think one of the problems I have with Lou's argument is that we have a lot of people claiming to have observed God. And even if you want to say that a vast majority of them are either crazy or lying, you're dismissing the fact that these claims exist outright. So for you to say that God is unobservable ignores the fact that a lot of people claim to have observed God. Now you have to establish why these testimonies are down to the last incorrect. Now I agree with the average skeptic saying that 99% of them are probably frauds or crazy people. But again, there are so many people of reputable standing that have claimed to have some sort of experience of God or something like a vision of an angel or heaven or hell, whatever, that we're not dealing with people who are lying or crazy. We're dealing with something else. And you have to entertain the possibility these people are actually observing these things. The only response at that point is say, well, it's brain chemistry. Well, what is brain chemistry? That could be what I'm doing right now could be brain chemistry. Or it could be, my mind actually perceiving a reality around me, and somehow these people are perceiving a reality that is undetectable for, in most circumstances. So I think that's kind of where I'm going with that. Answer this question directly, please. If 10,000 people told you they had real encounter with an invisible tooth fairy, would you believe them? Must I remind you that millions of people have claimed to have encountered all different types of gods with all different names, right? You've gotten philosophical quick here, which is typical of people who have no good evidence. Philosophy is not evidence. I would disagree with that. I think if you can establish by logic that something is true, that's the best evidence. It's better than observing things. Oh, Andy, sorry, we might have left already, but thank you for being here. Good talking to you. Thank you for your insights. Is he falsifiable, observable, detectable? What premise do you disagree with? Is God testable? Is he falsifiable? Is he observable, detectable? Dark matter is both testable and falsifiable. No, it's not. We can't test. You see, this is Dark Lou's, or excuse me, Brooklyn Lou's out of his league here. He doesn't know what dark matter is. And I'm not even sure of its place in reality because it's not fully. Yeah, you don't understand it, Lou. I do not fully understand it. Is there a reason to believe that God is real that people have said he is? No. But you made the claim that God has never been observed. And I'm just saying that that's not true. A lot of people claim to have observed God. If so, that is fine for you. But again, I'm not buying it. Stories are not evidence when they contradict known facts, and what they describe is unfalsifiable. Stories are not evidence when they contradict. So what are the known facts being contradicted? And if you can't falsify what someone says, that means what they say isn't something that should be listened to and taken into consideration. It's not evidence. Evidence is whatever contributes to the possibility that a certain proposition is true. If people claim to have seen God, and you're saying that God is unobservable, which means that no one is, then you're wrong. Stories told by other people are also hearsay. Okay, hearsay can be true. Just because it's hearsay doesn't mean it's false. People tell stories all the time. We're just going to say, oh, that's hearsay. It's not true. No. I mean, hearsay is a lot of what passes for real information in most of our lives. You can't just say, oh, it's somebody's story. Well, somebody saw that, Lou. Somebody saw God. For that person, it's not hearsay. It's actual direct. I think I get into that in the next reply. Okay, the tooth fairy thing is I would have to hear exactly what they are claiming in regards to the invisible tooth fairy. If that many people had such an encounter independently, and there was no evidence that they were conspiring, then I think that would merit consideration at least. To the people who have had the experience, that is evidence for them. I would say when you experience something directly, that would approximate proof, barring insanity, which could also always be a possibility. If it is evidence for them or proof, that others can justifiably say it is evidence for the general public. Nobody has experienced everything to some extent. To fully understand reality, we must rely on the experience of others, even in the scientific realm. Have you ever seen a small dog-like creature turn into a whale over 1,000 generations? By the way, that is what evolutionist scientists claim happened. No, but you trust the experts who say that is what happened. You have no clue if their analysis of the fossil record is accurate, but you are trusting their experience and personal knowledge. And that applies to much of what you think of as hard science. You don't personally understand it, but you trust the experts do. So that is your faith. But somehow you dismiss the experiences of people who have experiences of a higher power, which seems a double standard to me. So I'm not going to belabor this too often. He goes on. I don't respond to his next one just because I probably didn't have time at that point. But yeah, my argument to Brooklyn Lou is, first of all, there were a lot of things in history that weren't testable for most of our history just because we didn't have the tools to do so. But that didn't mean they weren't true. So can we test God right now? Probably not. At least I don't know how. But does that mean God doesn't exist? Absolutely not. If God exists, that's a scientific fact. It's just a fact of reality. There really aren't scientific facts. They're just facts. And people try to distinguish, there's scientific facts and there's other types. But no, they're just facts. They're just things that are true. It's not like the facts that are discovered by science are different from other facts. Everything that's true is a fact of reality. If God is real, then that's a fact. It's a scientific fact. It's as good as any other fact. And whether we'll be able to test that at some point, maybe. Who knows? But in the meantime, he also claimed that God is unobservable. Okay, well, that ignores the countless people throughout history who have claimed to have observed God. Oh, he doesn't believe those people. Okay, why? Well, they're frauds or they're crazy. Okay, all of them? Every single one of them? Well, some people might have seen something, but it probably was just them hallucinating, or was it okay? Well, that's your belief. Not those people. All they have is their experience to tell others, and you're just going to dismiss them as wackos or off their meds or whatever. That seems quite dismissive, and people like Lou don't realize that they actually have to, for atheism to be true, there's a lot of things that they have to take on faith as well, which I kind of went into in my last response. Let's see. Whoever understands heaven and the meaning of everything in it will be a thinking person. The world teacher Peter Dunov. All right, interesting. Are NDA near death or literal death? I'm not sure what's being asked there. If literal death, then who raised them from the dead? Okay, good questions, I guess. I'm not sure if I have an answer. Dark matter is just objects in space that don't give off light, so we can't see it, like planets and stuff. We know it's there because its gravity affects stuff we can see, like stars. Could be. That could be true. I think the point is we actually don't know at this point that that's true, but that actually would make sense. If God wanted Jesus today, why did he raise him from the dead? That's a good question. It could have been the actual spirit creatures, God, Jesus, and experience that brought them back. Okay. Responding to Freddie, I guess. God didn't want Jesus to be murdered. Read Mark 12:6. Yes, I do agree that NDEs are difficult to reconcile with most of the New Testament, at least. I'm not sure if that's true. I don't think there's a problem harmonizing NDEs with what Jesus taught. Freddie was responding to my question to you about NDEs. Okay, what did you originally ask? Let me go back and look at that. Oh, there it is. I missed it. What's your take on near-death experiences? I would argue and actually call some of them death experiences. Some of them were clinically dead for a bit. Yeah, they're very fascinating. I think everyone should look into them and investigate them. I think probably a lot of them are fabricated stories. Okay, so I'll just say that. But I think also clearly the medical institutions have determined that people are actually having these and they're not lying about them, which leads to various theories about what is actually going on here. Skeptics will obviously say that it's just brain chemistry of people going haywire at the moment of death. I think that's ludicrous. I think that brain chemistry can't explain anything in the mind. It can, well, I shouldn't say that. There's definitely a correlation between the mind, but I don't think brain chemistry can produce thoughts or produce a mind. It can only maybe influence a mind. So to say it's simply brain chemistry, I think is wrong, even if only because they have actually done brain scans of people who later reported having near-death experiences, and they found that basically they were having these loud experiences while they were brain dead, which means there was no neural activity. So they're having experiences while brain dead. And I think what's probably going on here is that in some cases, these people are actually experiencing some sort of consciousness that would be approximate what it's like to die. And that, in my opinion, that makes their experiences more valid than anything else you could read about in terms of the death experience, because it's something that people directly experience as opposed to something that is like related in a book, even if it's in a sacred text. So I'd be much more willing to listen to the people who had these experiences than I would to read anything in like a holy book about like what it's like to die and what it's like to experience death. Now, there's a couple problems with that. You can't just go ahead and say that it is definitely that, because, like I said, I think it's clear that some of these people are absolutely lying, and some of them are trying to become famous or make money. And I also think it's clear that some of these people are hallucinating. It's very possible that some people, when they come very close to dying, just hallucinate and see things. So it's a lot of muddy water. I think it's just an area that people have to investigate in their own. And I think when they do, what they'll find is that a vast majority of it is gobbledygook, which is the case with a lot of what's true, with a lot of spiritual information. But there is a seed of truth in it, which can lead to a lot of very relevant knowledge for people who want to understand these things. Just to be clear, I've done quite a bit of research, and I believe there is much. Yeah, I do. I agree with you, Grant. I think that near-death experiences are very valuable. I think that these people are most likely. Again, nothing can be. The problem is you can't prove anything. Like, so skeptics rely on that, but when so many people have. And if it was just one person, that would be easy to dismiss. I think part of what lends it all credence is that so many people have had these experiences across so many different cultural groups and demographic groups, and basically people who have nothing to get, who enough of them are not trying to gain anything from it. They're just trying to tell their experience. I think the atheists are taking a big L with NDEs. What the atheists are trying to say is that it's all brain chemistry. It's all hallucination. They've abandoned the narrative that it's just a bunch of lying frauds and none of this is really happening. Because even secular medical institutions have studied these things and said, this is not fake. People are not making up that they're having these. There's too many people having them, and there's too many independent witnesses and people saying these things. They're not collaborating, they're not conspiring. People really do have these experiences. At that point, your only option is to try to explain the experience, not to say that it's a bunch of frauds lying about something to make money or something, which is what the atheists were originally trying to do. So, well, let me close out this real fast. Well, yeah, let's close out that because we'll come back to that. The problem is, for people who are skeptical, it's subjective. But for the people who've had them, to you, that's proof. That's your experience. So I'm willing to listen to what people's experiences are. People like Brooklyn Lou would just tell them, that's just hearsay. But like, how do you look someone in the eye and just say your experience is hearsay? It's like, no, I saw that. Brooklyn Lou, he just wants to dismiss it. Say you didn't observe anything. Well, yes, I did. I observed it. So Brooklyn Lou's wrong. People like Brooklyn Lou are wrong. People have observed these things. The question is, what explains it? Is it brain chemistry? Is it hallucination? Is it insanity? Or is it something real? Something about consciousness we don't understand? I think that I think that's very likely that it is an aspect of consciousness that is being ignored by science right now. I think there are people who've been like declared dead for certain amounts of time, maybe not 2 or 3 days, but I recently saw something that somebody was he had been put in a coffin and he burst out of the coffin. That might be made up, but I did see that somewhere. It's just that I believe most of the Bible anyway tells me that when you're dead, you're in that sleep state. Even no, I don't think it says that, Grant. Yeah, okay. Some verses may say otherwise. Depends on interpretation. I don't think soul sleep is actually taught in the Bible. Maybe it is. I think soul sleep mostly comes from some traditions. Like I know the Seventh-day Adventists teach soul sleep, but I think that there are verses in the Bible that indicate conscious awareness in the afterlife. And I think that even if the Bible, like for me, direct experience is better than anything written in a book. So if people are saying they experience something, I'm gonna take that as being superior to claims in a book. I don't know. Maybe other people might disagree with that because you could say that, like the Book of Luke, it's testimonial, so you can't really. To me, if it can be verified that someone had an experience, which is hard to do, I would rather go by what people are directly experiencing than anything else. To me, direct experience is the ultimate validator of what's true and real. And even if I haven't experienced it myself, if someone else has experienced it, that's sufficient for me. But it would be nice to be able to verify that they have it. And like I said, with near-death experiences, I think that enough people have had them, and the medical community has basically agreed that these experiences are happening, that to me, it's a reliable source of information that basically, if it was studied, could give us a better idea than pretty much any spiritual tradition in the world. Because you're not talking about claims being made by people, you're talking about things that people actually experienced. So that's the ultimate determiner of what's true. Maybe we'll try to review this video real quickly. All right, here's an atheist. Let me share my screen again. We'll do this quickly. So this is a modern day debate. Does God exist? Between Mr. Biscuit Speaks and Danny at Phil Talk. This was streamed 11 days ago on January 2nd, 2006 on the Modern Day Debate channel, Does God Exist? So I'm going to listen to the atheist opening statement and respond to it.
There we go. Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating, does God exist? And we're starting right now with Danny's opening statement. Thanks so much for being with us. Danny, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. So I'm an atheist, and I guess I'll present a kind of one of the reasons why I'm an atheist. Part of the issue is that there's different conceptions of God, so there's a discussion about what exactly I'm denying. But I think the argument I'm about to give kind of covers most conceptions, if not all conceptions of God. So one such argument goes something like this. Some people call it the low prize argument, kind of developed by Paul Draper. I think Graham Oppy has kind of flirts with a version of it. And the basic idea is this: if you compare a simple theistic hypothesis, God exists and created the universe and humanity all within it, with a simple atheistic hypothesis, there is no God. And the universe either exists uncaused, always existed, or arose in some non-theistic way. Before you consider any evidence, the atheistic hypothesis is much more probable. This is because it's compatible with a far wider range of possibilities, whereas the theistic hypothesis offers a very specific causal story among countless alternatives. Even if I knew the universe had a cause, it would be instantly...
Can I ask a question? How can the universe possibly not have a cause? It exists, right? So there must be a basis for its existence. So he's thinking about a cause in terms of cause and effect, maybe. But to me, the idea that the universe just exists and there's no cause doesn't even make sense at all. there must be an explanation for why existence exists. So the question becomes, what is the basis for existence? The universe always existed. How? Like, what is the basis of its existence? And how did it get immutable laws of physics? Because even if you have matter, what determines how the particles of matter interact with one another? Because they're governed by mathematical equations and stuff. So what caused that? Did the matter just decide it wants to behave a certain way? Did the speed of light, did the photons just be like, you know what, I'm going to go this speed? So to say that the universe, to even suggest that the universe doesn't have a cause is nonsensical in my opinion. The question is the cause of the universe in like a god, which would be a being with a consciousness and awareness and intelligence, or is it something that is just mindless, essentially? But there is a cause. There is a reason that the universe exists as it does. We know that in quantum physics, things come into existence. I don't think we know that. I really don't think we know that. Even when there was nothing, there was nothing. My head hurts. Is that something he actually said? Hold on, let me go back. Did I miss that?
Exceptions of God. So one such argument goes something like this. Some people call it the low prize argument, kind of developed by Paul Draper. I think Graham Oppy has kind of flirts with a version of it. And the basic idea is this. If you compare a simple theistic hypothesis, God exists and created the universe and humanity all within it, with a simple atheistic hypothesis, there is no God. And the universe either exists uncaused, has always existed, or arose in some non-theistic way. Before you consider any evidence, the atheistic hypothesis is much more.
So if you assume, so there are two possibilities. Here's his argument. There's a theistic argument, and then let's go with the proposition that the universe arose in some non-theistic way. And then he goes on to say that the non-theistic way is just more probable. Let's listen to that again. Let's just really listen to what he says here. He's presupposing the truth of his own viewpoint. I think this is interesting.
Hypothesis, God exists and created the universe. And by Paul Draper, I think Graham Oppy has kind of flirts with a version of it. And the basic idea is this. If you compare a simple theistic hypothesis, God exists and created the universe and humanity all within it.
Okay, so if we compare a simple theistic hypothesis, God exists, created the universe and the people in it, okay, with what?
With a simple atheistic hypothesis.
With a simple atheistic hypothesis.
There is no God.
There is no God.
Verse either exists uncaused, has always existed, or arose in some non-theistic way.
The universe arose in some non-theistic way.
Before you consider any evidence, the atheistic hypothesis is much more probable.
The atheistic proposition is much more probable. What? According to whom? This is an opinion. This is not anything that's based in facts or even an actual argument. He's just saying, before you even look at the evidence, the atheist proposition is just more likely. Wait, what? That's the whole argument. I don't know. So far, let's listen to his whole argument. Maybe I'm not giving him enough time to lay it all out.
And this is because it's compatible with a far wider range of possibilities, whereas the theistic hypothesis offers a very specific causal story among countless alternatives. Even if I knew the universe had a cause, it would be instantly unlikely that the cause was precisely the God of theism rather than something else.
So precisely the God of theism. So the God of theism, I have a problem with that. It's not the God of theism, it's just God. Even if I knew the universe had a cause, it's unlikely that he's basically saying, even if I knew the universe had a cause, which to me, why wouldn't it? It has to have a cause. This guy's a philosopher, by the way. He's literally a philosopher. So the fact that he's suggesting that the universe doesn't have a cause is very problematic to me. But what did he say that was?
Very specific causal story among
Oh, the God of theism. It's not the God of theism. Just eliminate the of theism. It's just the God. It's just that there is God.
countless alternatives. Even if I knew the universe had a cause, it would be instantly unlikely that the cause was precisely the God of theism rather than something else. And then when you add in evidences about minds, how they're really dependent on things like central nervous systems.
So when you add in things like how minds are dependent on he has not established that. And I strongly disagree with that. And I've argued that on my channel a number of times, that minds are not dependent on brains. They're not. Logically, a mind cannot be dependent on a central nervous system. It's impossible. It's logically impossible. Atheists have a really hard time with this. What? Every time we've observed a mind, it's been attached to a brain. That's not even true. Like, scientists are seeing that even it looks like even like molecules within our bodies are capable of making decisions. They have to be able to decide to go left or right inside this. Like when there's a little molecule, a nutrient inside your cell, it's basically what it is. It's a molecule that's beneficial for your cell that has to go somewhere in your cell to do whatever it does. The thing is, cells are actually very complicated places, and there's a lot going on in there. And even though it's a very small distance relative to our whole body, like the molecules themselves, the cell is gigantic. It's like the size of it's like a little bug walking around in a football stadium. And it has to get from one side of the football stadium to the other to do what it does. But imagine there's a little bug walking that needs to get to the other side of the football stadium, and there's all these obstacles in its way. And it has to go around them. If it bumps into them, it's going to get stopped, or it'll hit it and it'll bounce off it and go the wrong direction. Scientists have observed that somehow the molecules in our cell know exactly where to go, and they go there directly. And if something obstructs them, they go around it and keep going in the right direction. And if they weren't able to do this, then our bodies would decompose like almost instantly, because our cells couldn't function, because the things that make our cells work can't go to the right place in the cell to do the job they need to do. So there are molecules inside of cells making decisions every single moment of every day, trillions of times. And if they couldn't do this, the cells would fall apart. They couldn't function because everything in our cells would just run into each other. Nothing would go to where it needs to be, and the whole system would collapse ultimately. So molecules actually, as strange as it sounds, scientists have found out that, the molecules in our body are capable of making decisions. Now, molecules don't have brains. So the question immediately arises, how do the molecules know what the heck to do? How do they know where to go? They have to go to the right place or the cell doesn't work, and they know how to do it. But they're just molecules. So how are they doing this? This works like in DNA replication is a good example. Like somehow the DNA just knows how to, this spindly material in your cell, it's all wound up. It's all tangled together. It's just a molecule. It doesn't see anything. It can't think. It can't know it's all tangled up. When the cell replicates, the DNA unwinds itself and all the chromosomes line up next to each other at the exact right time in the exact right place, despite the fact that none of the chromosomes is aware or conscious of any of this going on and has no ability to think about moving around inside the cell. But somehow it just knows what to do. Is this just the laws of physics, just randomly making your chromosomes line up perfectly while the cell splits? No, somehow the DNA is in there just dancing around, just doing exactly what it needs to do at the exact right time. Does the DNA have a brain? Does it know how to think? questions we really can't answer at this point. We just look at it happening and say, we don't know what's happening, but it's doing it. We can look at it happening. We don't know how it happens. So again, this is just one example of things in our universe making decisions without a brain that we can't explain.
And, kind of delicate in our world, right? Then to think that there's one that, has total control over the phenomena that we observe in the natural world, right? I think that makes it even less probable. When you add in things like evil or omni properties or anything of the
evil. So I've dealt with the problem of evil many times on this channel. It's not a problem. So omni properties, okay, we do run into issues there, but that only, even if you could falsify those, it would only falsify a specific concept of God, not the idea of an intelligent creator.
The stuff that classical theists sort of flirt with immutability, atemporality, all of that, timelessness, then the probability goes down to almost zero in some cases, depending on how coherent the conception of God that you have. But that's one of the main reasons why I think I'm an atheist. It covers a lot of the basis for that.
All right, so that's why he's an atheist, and I really didn't see anything that would cause me to doubt my own theism. Nothing, not even close. In fact, I just think a lot of what he said, and I'm not trying to be rude, now Danny from Phil Talk, I've actually had conversations with him. I doubt he remembers me, but I've had several conversations with him going years back. And personally, this is just my opinion, I was able to get the best of him. He's another one who has interacted with me. I invited him on my channel. He ignores me. I mean, it's okay to ignore me. I'm not saying you have to interact with me, but he's another one who just does. And so I know who he is what I'm trying to say. And I know that he actually is I think he's a professor of philosophy at some university. I don't remember exactly, or if he's not a professor, he's like a TA. He has like a degree in philosophy, and I think he actually is a professor of philosophy somewhere. And he's given us, granted, a short explanation of why he's an atheist. Basically, atheism is just inherently more likely because of Occam's razor. Okay. Makes a suggestion that it's possible the universe doesn't even have a cause. Okay, even if the universe existed eternally, there's still a basis for the universe of existing, and what is the basis? And then he says things like, we know that minds have to be attached to a central nervous system. This is just scientifically false. We know that's not true. There are organisms that can clearly think, that don't have brains. Scientists have determined that single-celled bacteria can make decisions. They're very clearly making decisions. If you have a single cell, it means you don't have a brain, because a brain requires multiple cells. There is logical reasons to basically acknowledge that the mind, if rational thought is possible, then it's impossible that the mind is purely a product of the brain. Things like this. I'm not sure how the debate unfolded. I'll have to watch the rest of it, but I don't know. Just watching the opening statement, the very brief opening statement, I did not see a single thing that even came close to making me question my own theism, but I did see very significant logical flaws in his own thought process. That's my opinion. All right. So we're going to shut down the stream pretty soon here. Changing the subject, I just found another instance where Jesus did not know everything. Mark 9:17-29. Take a look at it. Let's take a look at it. And one of the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son, possessed with a spirit which makes him mute, and whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth, and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not do it." And he answered them and said, "O unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? bring him to me. They brought the boy to him. When he saw him, immediately the spirit threw him into a convulsion, and falling to the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And he asked his father, for how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. It has often thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the boy's father cried out, I do believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that a crowd was rapidly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and do not enter him again. After crying out and throwing him into terrible convulsions, it came out, and the boy became so much like a corpse that most of them said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and raised him, and he got up. When he came into the house, his disciples began questioning him privately, why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, this cannot be come out by anything but prayer. Okay. Didn't know about expelling the spirit demon by use of prayer. Jesus didn't know that the spirit demon needed to be expelled by prayer as well. Otherwise, why would he rebuke the disciples? I don't know. To me, it seems more like, why would he? It seems to me like Jesus potentially could have known how to remove it all along, but the disciples was the problem. They were the ones who didn't know what to do. So I don't see how this is a reflection of what Jesus did or didn't know. That's just my opinion. Like the Kirk episode, he told murderous android Scotty only tells the truth, and then Scotty tells them, I'm a liar, and the android freaks and overheats. Yeah. Our universe is an institution governed by a universal teacher. This goal can only be achieved through the exercises of pan-your-rhythmy. I do not know what that is. Pan-your. Physical musical exercises developed by Peter Dunov, focusing on achieving inner balance and harmonization. Well, I'll take your word for it. Slavic Brotherhood. Probably, hold on. Why rebuke the disciples? Because they didn't know. They should have known. I mean, that's my initial reaction, Grant. I'm not trying to dismiss what you're saying here. To me, it's like he probably felt like they should have known what to do, but didn't do it properly. And so he's like, you numbskulls, can you get anything right? And then he does it himself. So really he's rebuking them for not, they didn't know, but how does that make it, how is that a problem for Jesus? Because Jesus is rebuking them for not knowing, but that doesn't mean Jesus himself doesn't know. His problem with them is exactly that. They didn't know. Maybe he taught them what to do beforehand and they didn't get it right. That could be an explanation. It could be that before this, outside of this narrative, Jesus had taught them what to do and they just bungled it. And now he's rebuking them. So that's kind of how I mean, again, is that the actual answer? I don't know. But that would make sense to me. Do you think the Earth decides to revolve around the sun? At what point to attribute the laws of physics to an unguided natural processes versus molecules choosing how to function? It's actually a really good question. There has to be, at some level, there has to be a point at which things become conscious. And I think that maybe that's something that eventually science will discover. Like, what's the difference between an inanimate object that can't govern its own movement and animate objects that apparently have the ability, one way or another, to do these things? I will say that answering this question would obviously be very difficult, but from a practical level, I think we can very clearly distinguish between living things and non-living things at this time. Like, scientists actually do have a hard time defining what life actually is when you try to get down to it. It could be, now this is just, again, speculating about interesting questions. It could be that these molecules actually aren't making decisions on their own, but that something else within the cell or within the living entity is guiding them and knows how to guide them. But that would certainly also go way beyond our current scientific understanding of biology. Like, the current paradigm is that these molecules are just moving around based on the laws of physics. I'm going to go ahead and say right now that that's very simplistic and probably isn't ultimately correct. So the question is, what is making these molecules do the right thing? And by the way, I did cover this phenomenon of molecules making decisions in the body in one of my ID updates. I don't remember which one. I think it might have actually been the first one. So this is not something that creationists have come up with to make it a bunch of woo-woo. These are secular scientists observing these things happening and basically admitting they don't know how to explain it from a purely physicalist perspective, from just saying the laws of physics would suggest this, but the things in the cells are doing otherwise. So somehow the molecules in the cell know what to do. And again, it's not something a scientist has to tell anyone. It's just, we can observe, most people can observe this happening on their own. It's just logic. Like, if there's a molecule in a cell, how does it know where to go in the cell? It has to go to the right place at the right time. And it has to go around all the other organelles in the cell to get where it's going. But the laws of physics would determine that it would kind of bump into these things and not go to the right place at the right time, which would lead to catastrophic failure. So for the function, these little molecules have to be able to do this. But the question is, how are they doing it? And honestly, I just don't think there's a, quote, scientific answer to that. Now, there is an answer because it's happening. But can it be explained from a purely materialistic perspective? Materialistic being no mind involved, just the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, electromagnetism, the atomic forces. Can that explain everything? I don't know. I don't think so. But how? What is the answer? I don't know. Do you believe consciousness is fundamental, as in non-dualism? I think that's possible. It could be that these molecules are a physical manifestation of an underlying imperceptible consciousness, and thus all matter does at some level have consciousness. And at some point, in some level of organization, it does gain the ability to determine its own motion through space and time. But again, that would be more theoretical than something that can be empirically demonstrated at this time in human development. There is some interesting hypothesis out there about consciousness at the fundamental level. Bioelectric function is the area of study in simple organisms, which is producing some interesting results. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. I would just say, objective ethics, that right now we don't have the answer to what's going on here scientifically. But whatever the answer is, that answer is the scientific truth. And truth, there's no such thing as a scientific truth. There's not like there's categories of truth, like supernatural truths and natural truths. If it is some sort of mind guiding or consciousness guiding these particles, then that's just the truth. It's not supernatural. It's not unnatural. It's not mystical. It's just, it's as much a scientific truth as, water is made up of H2O. The sun is hot. All these other scientific truths that exist out there that we can look at and see. But to me, the problem is that the materialists of our current era want to dismiss the idea that mind could be the basis of what's going on. They want to say it's just matter and energy and the laws of physics. And nothing can make a decision ultimately. It's just matter moving through space, all of it. And it can't make a decision. It just looks like it's making a decision, but it's just a coincidence that it's all magically happening properly. I don't know. I think that's obviously extremely unlikely. So materialism is almost certainly false if we define materialism as just matter and energy with no mind, which is how most atheists and skeptics think about it. So in my opinion, scientific observations actually, ironically, falsify materialistic physicalism, naturalism of that sort. The hard physicalism, methodological naturalism, whatever you want to call it. All right, guys, I went over what I was intending to do, so I have to shut down the stream. But I really appreciate everyone who participated. Hopefully, it was a good discussion. Again, I'm not saying I'm proving anything either about the Bible, Christianity, or science. I just think it was an interesting discussion that can generate thought, and hopefully, it leads people to wherever they are in their life closer to the ultimate truth. And whether I have that truth, I would like to think I do. Maybe I don't, but maybe discussing these things, even though I'm missing something, leads other people to find, to basically believe more things that are true and less things that are false. So that's ultimately the goal. That's how humanity will make progress. Ultimately, maybe we can imagine a time billions of years from now where maybe humanity hasn't destroyed itself and everything everyone believes is just the truth. And everyone knows everything there is to know. Wouldn't that be wild? Think about that world where no one has to argue because everyone just knows the truth. There's no arguments about anything. Even moral truths are known. We know what's morally true and what isn't. We know what's scientifically true and what isn't. That would be wild. Imagine that world where there's no arguing. What would we do with ourselves? That would almost be boring. Anyways, hopefully this conversation will lead us to that reality at some point in the future. Yeah, glad everyone was here, and hopefully we'll have more conversations like this. Everyone check out Objective Ethics channel. I will be on his channel on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern United States time, and we'll see how that conversation develops. Thank you for being here, Objective Ethics, and your contributions and insights, everyone. All right, like and subscribe is the last thing I'll say, and until next time, God bless.